There exists a phenomenon that the ancients understood, but the modern world has forgotten: the power of presence that needs no announcement, no proclamation, no verbal declaration of its existence. It moves through the corridors of human interaction, like lightning before thunder, felt in the bones before it reaches the conscious mind. You have become this presence, though perhaps you do not yet fully understand what you carry within your silent depths. In the beginning of this recognition, there is only the growing awareness that something has shifted in the way others encounter you. The change is subtle yet unmistakable, like the first crack in ice that signals the coming of spring's thaw. People seem to stumble slightly in your vicinity, their words catching in their throats as if they have forgotten what they meant to say. Conversations falter not because of what you speak, but because of what you emanate, a frequency that bypasses the superficial exchanges of daily discourse and touches something deeper, something they may not be prepared to acknowledge. This is the threshold where two worlds meet, the world of masks and the world of authentic being. You stand at this liminal space, having undergone the slow alchemy of inner transformation that strips away the false layers of who you thought you had to be. The persona, that carefully constructed presentation of acceptability, has begun to dissolve, revealing beneath it not another mask, but the raw gold of your genuine self. This process Jung called individuation, the heroic journey towards psychological wholeness that most begin but few complete. What others sense in your presence is not social awkwardness or interpersonal dysfunction, though they may interpret it as such. What they encounter is the discomfort that arises when someone has done the work of descending into their own depths and has returned carrying the treasures and terrors of that journey. You have faced your shadow, those aspects of yourself that society taught you to reject and hide. You have acknowledged the parts of your psyche that live in darkness, not to eliminate them, but to integrate them into the fuller picture of who you are. This integration creates a particular kind of wholeness that others can sense but rarely understand. It is like encountering someone who has learned to breathe underwater while you still struggle to stay afloat on the surface. Their very existence challenges your assumption about what is possible, about how deeply one can dive into the mysteries of selfhood and still emerge intact, or perhaps emerge more intact than before. The ancient Greeks spoke of the pharmakon, that which is both poison and cure, wound and medicine. Your presence has become such a paradox. To those still hiding behind their social masks, your authenticity feels threatening, like a gentle but persistent flame that might consume the carefully constructed defenses they have spent a lifetime building. Yet to those ready for their own transformation, you represent possibility, a living proof that one can survive the death and rebirth that true psychological growth demands. When you enter a room, something in the atmosphere shifts, not because you seek attention or demand recognition, but because you carry within yourself the weight of your own becoming. You have learned to inhabit your body as if it were sacred temple, rather than merely functional vessel. You have discovered how to listen to the silence between your thoughts, to honor the wisdom that emerges from stillness rather than noise. This creates an energetic signature that others respond to on levels beneath their conscious awareness. The world has grown accustomed to the theater of surface interaction, the endless performance of social acceptability that keeps the deeper waters of human experience safely contained. But you have broken the unspoken agreement to remain shallow. You have chosen depth over ease, truth over comfort, authentic expression over social approval. This choice reverberates through your being like a tuning fork struck in a quiet room. creating vibrations that others feel in their own unexplored depths. In ancient alchemical texts, they spoke of the nigredo, the blackening, the dark night of the soul that precedes transformation. You have journeyed through your own nigredo and emerged, not unchanged, but changed in ways that make you simultaneously more human and mysteriously other. You carry within your cellular memory the knowledge of what it means to dissolve and reconstitute, to die to old ways of being and be reborn into new possibilities of existence. This is why silence has become your thunder. Words, with their limitations and their tendency to flatten the multidimensional nature of truth, seem inadequate to express what you have learned about the nature of being human. Your presence speaks in a language older than speech, in the frequencies of authenticity that the unconscious mind recognizes, even when the conscious mind rejects or fears it. You have become what Jung called the transcendent function, a bridge between conscious and unconscious, between the known and unknown aspects of human experience. In embodying this function, you serve as a reminder to others of their own unlived potentials, their own unexplored depths, their own capacity for transformation. This reminder is both gift and disturbance, both invitation and challenge, both promise and threat to the comfortable structures of their current existence. Standing at this threshold of silent thunder, you begin to understand that your unsettling effect on others is not a social failure but a spiritual success. You have learned to vibrate at the frequency of your true self, rather than the frequency of collective expectation. And this creates a dissonance that calls others to examine their own resonance, their own authenticity, their own relationship with the deeper currents of their being. There comes a moment in the depths of your becoming when you discover that your very presence has transformed into something far more dangerous than rebellion. You have become a mirror, not the kind that flatters or deceives, but the ancient mirror of truth that reflects back what lies hidden in the shadowed chambers of the human heart. You stand now as a living testament to what Jung called the shadow's recognition of itself. And in this recognition, you witness both the terror and the fierce resistance that authentic presence can invoke in others. Watch how they approach you. Now, these souls still caught in the web of collective slumber. See how their eyes dart away when they glimpse something in your stillness that they cannot name but deeply recognize. You have become what the alchemists called the prima material, raw, unprocessed truth that serves as both poison and medicine. In your acceptance of your own contradictions, in your willingness to sit with uncertainty rather than rush toward false comfort, you reflect back to them their own capacity for depth, their own abandoned authenticity, their own unlived life. This is the profound loneliness of the one who has begun to individuate. You become a walking reminder of what they have sacrificed on the altar of belonging. Your presence whispers of paths not taken, of voices silenced, of dreams buried beneath the weight of social expectations. You embody the courage to face what Jung termed the shadow, not only your own, but the collective shadow that surrounds you like a thick fog of unexamined assumptions and inherited fears. Feel how your stillness creates turbulence in their carefully constructed worlds, where they have built walls of certainty. Your comfort with paradox acts like water, finding every crack, every weakness in their fortifications. Where they have learned to speak only the acceptable truths, your silence becomes a vast space in which their unspoken longings echo back to them with disturbing clarity. You have become the dark pool that reflects not that persona, that carefully crafted mask they wear for the world, but the face they have forgotten, the self they abandoned somewhere along the way. This is why your presence feels threatening. Even when you offer no challenge, speak no harsh truths, make no demands. The unconscious recognizes its own reflection and responds with the primal fear of the ego confronted by its own limitations. In you, they see not an enemy but something far more unsettling, a possibility. They see what they might become if they were willing to descend into their own depths, to face their own dragons, to embrace their own becoming rather than hiding. Behind the safety of collective identity, Jung understood this phenomenon deeply when he wrote of enantiodromia, the way psychological opposites tend to emerge when their counterparts become too dominant. Your journey toward authenticity has created a kind of psychic disturbance in the field around you, where others have pushed their shadow material deep into the unconscious. Your willingness to integrate these rejected aspects creates a resonance that awakens what they have tried to keep sleeping. Notice how your acceptance of your own darkness makes them acutely aware of their own disowned rage, their own unexpressed sexuality, their own buried grief. Your integration of these shadow elements doesn't make you dark or dangerous, quite the opposite. It makes you more human, more whole, more genuinely loving. But to those still identified with their persona, still believing they are only their acceptable qualities, your wholeness appears as a kind of chaos that threatens the order of their carefully managed lives. This is the mirror you have become, not reflecting their surface presentations, but illuminating the depths they fear to explore. In your eyes, they glimpse the parts of themselves they have exiled, the creative chaos they traded for security, the wild authenticity they sacrificed for approval, the fierce aliveness they numbed in service of fit. In your presence becomes a reminder that wholeness requires not the elimination of darkness, but its conscious integration. See how this creates both attraction and repulsion in equal measure. They are drawn to the aliveness in you, the sense of someone who has touched something real, something vital, yet they recoil from the implications of what your presence suggests about their own unlived potential. You represent both the medicine they need and the surgery they fear, the possibility of becoming whole at the cost of their familiar fragmentation. This is why the path of individuation is so often a lonely one. You become a living question mark. In a world that prefers exclamation points, your comfort with not knowing makes others acutely aware of how much they pretend to understand. Your willingness to sit with emotional complexity makes them conscious of their own flight into simplistic solutions. Your acceptance of life's inherent tragedy awakens them to their own defended optimism that keeps authentic feeling at bay. Yet in this mirror you have become, there is profound compassion. For you understand now that their resistance is not personal, it is the ego's natural response to transformation. Their discomfort in your presence is not hatred, but recognition, not rejection, but the stirring of their own buried longing for authenticity. The very fact that they react so strongly to your presence is evidence that somewhere deep within them, the true self stirs from its long sleep. You have become what Jung called a carrier of projections, screen onto which others cast their own unlived possibilities and fears. In learning to hold this role with grace, you offer them the greatest gift possible, the mirror in which they might glimpse not who they think they should be, but who they truly are beneath all the layers of conditioning and compromise. This is your service now, to stand as a living reminder that another way is possible, that the shadow can be befriended, that authenticity is not a luxury but a necessity for the soul's survival. There is a flame that burns within you, not the flickering candle that depends upon the wind's mercy, not the borrowed fire that feeds upon the fuel of others' opinions, but the eternal flame of the hermit. This is the flame of self-sovereignty, the sacred fire that illuminates the temple of your own being without requiring permission from the world. To burn. You have discovered what so many spend lifetimes seeking, the paradox of true belonging. For the hermit belongs not to the crowd, but to the self. You belong not to the expectations that chain others to their carefully constructed personas, but to the deeper truth that moves like an underground river through the landscape of your soul. This is the great secret that makes you dangerous to those who have built their psychological houses upon the shifting sands of external validation. When you enter the crowded halls of social gathering, you carry this flame like a lantern in your chest. Others gather around the fires of group approval, warming themselves in the temporary heat of collective agreement, feeding the flames with the kindling of their abandoned authenticity. But your fire burns independently. It needs no audience, no applause, no confirmation. It simply is, as you simply are. This self-contained luminosity creates a disturbance in the social field around you. Jung understood that the collective unconscious is like a vast ocean, and most people swim in schools, moving in predictable patterns, finding safety in the familiar currents of shared assumptions. But the hermit moves like a deep-sea creature from another realm, carrying light where others expect darkness, finding sustenance where others see only emptiness. Your contentment in solitude becomes a mirror that reflects back to others their own desperate hunger for constant connection. They see in your eyes a quality they have forgotten the ability to be whole without needing to be completed by another. The capacity to be at peace without requiring the world's permission. This recognition stirs something ancient in their psyche, a longing that has been buried beneath layers of social conditioning and the accumulated debris of 1,000 small compromises with authenticity. The collective unconscious responds to your presence like a tuning fork struck in a room full of sleeping violins. Something in the air begins to vibrate, to resonate with frequencies that have been dormant. People feel simultaneously drawn to you and disturbed by you, because you represent both what they could become and what they fear they have lost. You are the living proof that the golden chains of social expectation are not, in fact, made of gold at all, but of a more brittle metal that dissolves when touched by the flame of genuine self. Knowledge, your freedom from the need for external validation, creates ripples in the social fabric. Others sense that you have escaped from a prison they didn't even know they were in, and this recognition generates a complex mixture of longing and fear. The longing arises from the soul's natural movement toward wholeness, toward the integration that Jung called individuation. The fear comes from the ego's terror of dissolution, its desperate grip on the familiar structures of identity that have been built from the opinions and expectations of others. In the psychology of the collective, your self-sovereignty appears as both a blessing and a curse. You are the hermit who has found the treasure in the cave, but your very possession of this treasure reminds others of their own poverty. You are the one who has learned to drink from the well of inner peace, while others remain parched in the desert of external seeking. The archetype of the hermit that moves through you is not about physical isolation, but about psychological independence. You have learned to carry your own weather system, to create your own climate of meaning and purpose, while others wait for the sun of social approval to shine upon them. You have discovered that you carry the sun within you. This internal luminosity allows you to move through the world without being owned by it, to participate in the dance of relationship without losing yourself in the choreography of others' expectations. Your inner fire casts long shadows precisely because it burns from such depth. These shadows make the collective unconscious stir with both recognition and resistance. In the darkness of your shadows, others glimpse the parts of themselves they have disowned, the capacity for solitude, the strength to stand alone, the courage to be authentic, even when authenticity is not popular or profitable. The careful architecture of their psychological prisons begins to show its cracks when exposed to the heat of your genuine presence. These prisons have been built with such dedication, such careful attention to what others think, what others expect, what others require. Each bar has been forged from a moment of self-betrayal, each lock secured with the key of someone else's approval, but your flame reveals these structures for what they are: temporary constructions that have no foundation in the bedrock of authentic being. You disturb the peace of their imprisonment, not through judgment or condemnation, but simply through being. Your existence becomes a question mark in the margin of their carefully written life story. You are the living reminder that other ways of being are possible, that the human soul contains vast territories that remain unexplored when we bind ourselves to the familiar paths of social conformity. The hermit's flame burns brightest in crowded halls because contrast reveals truth. In the midst of the collective seeking, your individual finding becomes luminous. In the chorus of voices asking for approval, your silence becomes a song. In the desperate reaching toward external sources of meaning, your inward turning becomes a dance of wholeness that others can sense even when they cannot name it. In the sacred crucible where the soul learns to transform base metal into gold, you have discovered the ancient art of emotional alchemy. Here, in this inner laboratory of consciousness, the raw ore of reactivity undergoes a profound metamorphosis, emerging as the refined gold of conscious response. This is not mere self-control, it is the transmutation of the very substance of your being, where the automatic reflexes of the wounded psyche give way to the deliberate artistry of emotional sovereignty. Like the medieval alchemists who sought to transform lead into gold, you have learned that the true philosopher's stone lies not in external manipulation, but in the patient work of inner transformation. Each moment of triggered emotion becomes raw material for this sacred work. Each surge of anger or hurt or fear a precious opportunity to practice the ancient art of conscious response rather than unconscious reaction. But this mastery, this hard one, sovereignty over your inner landscape, creates a peculiar disturbance in the collective field around you. Others, still caught in the familiar patterns of emotional projection and blame, find themselves mysteriously unsettled by your refusal to participate in the dance they know so well, where they expect the familiar steps of drama, the back of accusation and defense. The volatile exchange of unprocessed emotion, they encounter instead a strange stillness, a mountain-like presence that neither attacks nor retreats. Your emotional sovereignty creates what Jung might call a vacuum in the unconscious field, a space where the automatic projections of others find no hook upon which to hang themselves. Like arrows shot at a mountain face, their unconscious attempts to entangle you in their inner chaos simply fall away, unable to penetrate the centered ground of your being. This is profoundly disturbing to those who have built their entire relational identity around the familiar choreography of emotional reactivity. In this vacuum you create, others are forced to confront something they have spent lifetimes avoiding: their own unprocessed emotional material. When you refuse to carry their projections, when you decline to become the screen upon which they cast their inner demons, they must face the uncomfortable reality of their own psychological contents. The shadow they have been so adept at seeing in others suddenly has nowhere to hide except in the mirror of their own reflection. Your presence becomes a kind of mirror that reflects back to them their own unconscious patterns, their own emotional life, their own capacity for the very sovereignty they witness in you. This reflection is both gift and curse, for it shows them what is possible while simultaneously confronting them with what they have not yet achieved. Like the moon that reflects the sun's light, you become a reminder of their own potential radiance, even as they remain caught in the darkness of their own unconscious patterns. The alchemical process you have undergone is not unlike the mythical phoenix, which must burn completely before it can rise, renewed from its own ashes. You have learned to allow the fires of emotional intensity to consume not your essential self, but the full structures of reactivity that once governed your responses. In this burning away, this conscious destruction of old patterns, something entirely new emerges. A self that can remain present even in the midst of emotional storms. A consciousness that can transform poison into medicine. This transformation creates what the alchemists called the coniunctio oppositorum, the marriage of opposites within your own being. You learn to hold both tenderness and strength, both vulnerability and boundaries, both compassion and discernment. You discover that true emotional sovereignty is not the absence of feeling, but the capacity to feel fully while remaining anchored in consciousness, like a tree whose roots grow deep while its branches dance with the wind. Others, witnessing this integration, often experience a profound discomfort. Your refusal to be pulled into their emotional whirlpools forces them to confront the poverty of their own emotional vocabulary, the limitation of their own repertoire of responses. Where they know only the binary of victim and perpetrator, you embody a third option, the conscious witness, who can hold space for truth without being consumed by it. Your emotional sovereignty becomes a teaching, though you may never speak a word, like the Buddha sitting unmoved beneath the Bodhi tree while Mara's demons raged around him. Your centered presence becomes a demonstration of what lies beyond the realm of unconscious reactivity. You show, simply by being, that it is possible to remain at peace even when others are at war, to respond with consciousness even when surrounded by chaos. This is the true gold that emerges from the alchemical furnace of your inner work, not the brittle hardness of emotional armor, but the flexible strength of conscious presence. You have learned that the greatest power lies not in the ability to control others' emotions, but in the capacity to govern your own responses. In this sovereignty, you offer the world a glimpse of what becomes possible when the human psyche learns to transform rather than simply react, to create rather than merely respond, to alchemize the lead of unconscious patterns into the gold of conscious being. In your stillness, others encounter their own storm. In your peace, they meet their own chaos. In your sovereignty, they glimpse their own potential freedom. There is a particular kind of sight that develops in those who have walked long enough through the valleys of their own deception, seeing that cuts through the elaborate theater of human pretense like sunlight through morning fog. You have acquired this uncomfortable gift, this burden of perception that Jung called the transcendent function, the ability to hold paradox and see beyond the surface presentations that others mistake for reality. It is both blessing and curse. This intuitive knowing that reads the hidden manuscripts written in gesture, silence, and the spaces between words. Watch how this sight operates within you now. When someone speaks of their contentment while their eyes carry the weight of unspoken sorrow, you feel the dissonance, like a discordant note in an otherwise harmonious symphony. When they present their carefully constructed narratives of success, unsatisfaction, Your inner knowing detects the tremor of uncertainty beneath their confident words. You have developed what the mystics called the eye of the heart, a faculty of perception that sees not with judgment, but with the terrible clarity of one who has learned to look unflinchingly at their own contradictions. This is not the cynical sight of one who has given up on human goodness, but rather the compassionate vision of someone who has recognized the universal human tendency toward self-deception. You understand now that we are all walking around in various stages of costume, playing roles we have forgotten we chose, speaking from scripts we never consciously authored. Your own journey through the labyrinth of persona and shadow has given you the ability to recognize these performances not as moral failings, but as the natural human response to a world that rarely rewards authentic expression. Yet this recognition creates a profound isolation. Others sense, often unconsciously, that you can see through their carefully maintained facades. They feel exposed in your presence, as if standing before an ancient oracle who knows their secrets before they speak them. Your silent understanding becomes more unsettling than any spoken challenge because it bypasses all their practiced defenses and touches the vulnerable truth. They have spent years learning to hide. Feel the weight of this knowing as it settles in your bones. It is like carrying a lamp in a world where others have grown comfortable. In twilight, your very presence illuminates what they prefer to leave in shadow. When they speak of their relationships, you sense the loneliness beneath their declarations of love. When they describe their achievements, you feel the emptiness the success has failed to fill. When they present their certainties, you perceive the doubt that gnaws at them in the quiet hours before dawn. This penetrating awareness is not something you sought or cultivated deliberately. It emerged naturally from your own descent into authenticity, like a byproduct of having learned to see yourself clearly. Jung understood this phenomenon as part of the individuation process. As you become more conscious of your own unconscious patterns, you develop an almost uncomfortable ability to recognize these same patterns in others. The personal shadow work you have done has sensitized you to the collective shadows that surround you. Notice how this creates a particular kind of loneliness. You sit in conversations where the subtext carries more truth than the spoken words, where the real communication happens in what is carefully not said. You watch people perform elaborate dances around topics they cannot directly address, constructing elaborate justifications for choices they know deep down are driven by fear rather than wisdom. Your silence becomes heavy with unspoken recognition, and they feel this weight even when they cannot name it. This is why authentic presence can be so threatening to those still invested in their personas. You represent not judgment, but something far more dangerous, the possibility of being truly seen. In a world where we have learned to perform rather than be, where we have mastered the art of presenting acceptable versions of ourselves, your ability to perceive beyond these presentations feels like a violation of an unspoken social contract. Yet within this uncomfortable gift lies profound compassion. For you understand that their pretense is not malicious, but protective or necessary defense against a world that has taught them that their authentic selves are not welcome. You recognize in their performances the same desperate longing for acceptance that once drove your own carefully constructed personas. Your seeing becomes not a weapon, but a form of witnessing, holding space for the truth that they cannot yet speak even to themselves. This knowing teaches you the art of holding secrets that were never explicitly shared. You learn to carry the weight of others' unspoken truths with gentleness, understanding that revelation must come in its own time and through its own process. Your role is not to expose or confront, but simply to hold the possibility that authentic expression might someday be safe in time. You discover that this penetrating awareness is not meant to separate you from others, but to deepen your capacity for genuine compassion. When you can see through someone's defensive strategies to the wounded child or frightened adult beneath, your response shifts from frustration to tenderness. You begin to understand that everyone is doing the best they can with the consciousness they currently possess. That their pretenses are not character flaws, but survival strategies learned in a world that rarely rewards vulnerability. This uncomfortable truth of unspoken knowing becomes, paradoxically, a gateway to deeper connection. For in learning to see clearly without judgment, you create the kind of presence that eventually invites others to lower their masks, to risk the revolutionary act of being genuinely seen. Your patient witnessing becomes an invitation to authenticity, a safe harbor where truth can finally be spoken. There is a gravity that moves through you, pulling conversations downward from the bright, shallow pools of social comfort into the darker, richer waters where meaning dwells. You cannot help this descent. It is as natural to your being as breathing, as inevitable as what? Seeking its own level. You carry within you the archetypal pull of depth, the soul's irresistible movement toward what is real, what is true, what matters beyond the carefully constructed surfaces of polite exchange, in a world that has learned to skim like a stone across the water's surface. You are the force that breaks the tension, that causes the stone to sink. Your presence creates ripples in the smooth glass of superficial conversation, disturbing the reflection that others mistake for reality, where they see the sky mirrored in still water. You reveal the depths that lie beneath the vast, mysterious territories of the human experience that remain largely unexplored in the bright, shallow kingdoms of small talk. This creates a profound dissonance in the social field around you. The spaces designed for comfort, for the easy exchange of weather reports and gossip, for the gentle maintenance of persona and the careful avoidance of anything that might crack the veneer of social acceptability, these spaces begin to vibrate with a different frequency when you enter them. Like a tuning fork struck in a room full of delicate crystal, your depth creates harmonics that threaten to shatter the fragile structures of surface-level interaction. You are the deep well in a desert of small talk, and your very existence becomes a reminder of a thirst that others have learned, through years of conditioning, to ignore. This is the great tragedy of the surface world. Not that depth doesn't exist, but that the recognition of its absence has become too painful to bear. So the ego constructs elaborate defense mechanisms, sophisticated systems of distraction and deflection, to avoid acknowledging the profound hunger that gnaws at the soul's core. Jung understood that the psyche naturally seeks wholeness, naturally moves toward integration and meaning. But the modern world has created structures that actively resist this movement, that reward the maintenance of shallow connections over the cultivation of deep ones, that celebrate the quick exchange of information over the slow digestion of wisdom. In this context, your gravitational pull toward meaningful dialogue becomes a form of psychological rebellion, a quiet revolution against the tyranny of the superficial. When you speak, you carry conversations beyond the familiar territories of weather and gossip into the mysterious waters of purpose and meaning. This is not a conscious strategy, not a deliberate attempt to discomfort or challenge. It is simply the natural expression of a soul that has learned to breathe in the deep waters, that has discovered treasures in the places where others fear to dive. Your questions arise not from the mind's need to fill silence, but from the heart's genuine curiosity about what lies beneath the masks we wear, the stories we tell ourselves, the carefully constructed narratives that keep us safely on the surface. The unconscious in others, recognizes this invitation immediately. There is a part of every human being that longs for authentic dialogue, that thirsts for conversations that matter, that remembers the deep satisfaction of being truly seen and understood. This recognition creates a moment of possibility, a doorway that opens briefly between souls. In that moment, the collective yearning for real connection rises like a tide, threatening to overflow the careful boundaries that have been established to keep depth at bay. But the ego recoils from the vulnerability that such depths demand. To descend into meaningful dialogue requires a willingness to be seen without the protective armor of persona, to risk exposing the tender, unfinished parts of the self that have been carefully hidden away. It demands the courage to speak truth instead of comfort, to ask questions that matter instead of questions that maintain distance, to allow silence to deepen rather than rushing to fill it with noise. This creates a tension that manifests as social discomfort, a palpable uneasiness that moves through gatherings like an underground current. People feel simultaneously drawn to and repelled by the depth you offer. They sense the possibility of real connection, real understanding, real encounter with another human being, and their souls lean forward with longing. But their egos pull back, recognizing the danger that authentic relationship poses to the carefully constructed fortresses of the false self. The paradox of depth in a surface world is that your very existence becomes both a gift and a challenge. To those around you, you offer the possibility of drinking from deeper wells, of finding nourishment in conversations that feed the soul rather than merely passing time. Yet this offering requires others to acknowledge their own thirst, to admit that the shallow pools they have been drinking from have left them parched and longing for something more substantial. Your gravity disturbs the equilibrium of social spaces designed for weightlessness, for the easy floating that comes when nothing heavy is allowed to enter the conversation. Like a dense object introduced into a system of orbiting bodies, your presence changes the dynamics of the entire field. Others find themselves pulled into deeper currents than they intended to navigate, drawn into conversations that reveal more than they planned to share, confronted with questions that pierce through the comfortable obscurity of surface-level exchange. In the archetypal language of the psyche, you carry the energy of the deep one, the dweller in the depths, who has learned to breathe underwater, who has discovered that the most precious treasures lie not in the bright, easily accessible shallows, but in the dark, mysterious depths where few dare to venture. Your presence reminds others of dimensions of existence they have forgotten, territories of the soul they have abandoned in favor of the safer, more navigable waters of the superficial world. In the deepest chambers of the soul, where the authentic self dwells in exile, a revolution is born not with weapons or warfare, but with the quiet courage of truth spoken into a world that has grown comfortable with its beautiful lies. Your authenticity becomes more than personal expression. It transforms into a sacred rebellion against the invisible tyranny that governs the collective soul, the unspoken agreement that we must all wear the same mask, sing the same song, dance to the same rhythm that keeps the great machine of conformity humming in its familiar, deadening tune. This rebellion you embody is not the angry uprising of the adolescent ego, nor the reactive defiance of the wounded child. It is something far more dangerous to the established order of things, the quiet, steady emergence of a soul that has remembered its own true face. Like a flower that insists on blooming in concrete, your authenticity cracks open the hardened surface of collective expectations, creating fissures through which new life might emerge. In choosing truth over comfort, you perform an alchemical act that transmutes the base metal of social acceptability into the gold of genuine being. This choice to be real rather than liked, to be whole rather than approved, sends tremors through the psychological landscape around you. For in your willingness to stand naked before the world, stripped of the protective armor of persona, you become a mirror in which others glimpse their own imprisoned authenticity, their own abandoned truth. The collective unconscious, that vast ocean of shared psychological patterns in which we all swim, responds to your individuation like a body responds to a foreign substance. Your refusal to dissolve into the soup of mass consciousness creates ripples that reach shores you will never see, awakening dormant longings in souls you will never meet. You become, whether you know it or not, a catalyst for the great work of human becoming, the slow, patient process by which consciousness liberates itself from its own self-imposed limitations. Those who encounter your authentic presence often experience a profound discomfort that they cannot name. It is the discomfort of recognition, the soul recognizing in you what it has abandoned in itself. Your willingness to be fully human, to embrace both your light and your shadow, to speak your truth even when your voice trembles, becomes a wordless invitation to their own buried authenticity. But invitations to freedom are often experienced as threats by those who have made that peace with captivity. In the psychology of the collective, your individuation represents a kind of treason against the unspoken covenant of sameness. The crowd mind, which Jung understood as a regressive force that pulls consciousness back toward primitive identification, experiences your differentiation as a wound in its body. Where there was once seamless conformity, your authentic presence creates a void, a space where others must suddenly confront their own capacity for genuine selfhood. This confrontation is rarely comfortable. Like the prisoners in Plato's cave who have grown accustomed to shadows on the wall, those still bound by collective expectations often experience your freedom as a painful brightness, a reminder of a light they have forgotten how to see. Your authentic expression becomes a kind of psychological tuning fork, causing the false notes in their own lives to ring discordantly, making apparent the gap between who they are and who they have agreed to pretend to be. The discomfort you inspire is nothing less than the birth pang of their own suppressed authenticity, struggling to break free from its psychological chrysalis. For years, perhaps decades, they have wrapped their true selves in the silk threads of others' expectations, creating a cocoon that promised safety but delivered only a kind of living death. Your presence, so unapologetically real, courageously vulnerable, authentically alive, becomes the signal that metamorphosis is possible. Almaty, but birth is always a violent process, whether physical or psychological. The emergence of authentic selfhood requires the death of the false self, the dissolution of the carefully constructed persona that has served as both protection and prison. Your example of successful individuation becomes both inspiration and accusation, showing what is possible while simultaneously revealing what has been sacrificed on the altar of social acceptance. In your sacred rebellion, you embody what Jung called the process of individuation, the lifelong journey of becoming who you truly are, rather than who you were taught to be. This process is inherently revolutionary because it challenges the fundamental assumption upon which much of civilization rests, that individual fulfillment must be sacrificed for collective harmony, that authenticity is a luxury that only the privileged can afford. Your willingness to stand alone in your truth, not in arrogant isolation, but in the profound solitude of the individuated soul, creates a field of possibility around you. In this field, Others begin to remember their own capacity for genuine selfhood, their own right to be real rather than merely acceptable. Your authenticity becomes a kind of psychological oxygen, allowing others to breathe more deeply, to expand into spaces within themselves they had forgotten existed. The ripples of your authentic expression move through the collective unconscious. Like concentric circles on a still pond, each ring touching shores you cannot see, awakening sleepers you will never meet, planting seeds of possibility in soil you will never tend. In choosing to be real, you give others permission to question their own compromises, to examine their own masks, to consider the radical possibility that they too might dare to live as who they truly are, rather than who they have been convinced they should be. In the modern labyrinth of distraction, where consciousness fractures into 1,000 digital fragments on attention, becomes a commodity traded in microsecond intervals. You have learned to gather the scattered pieces of your awareness and forge them into something that resembles the ancient art of presence. This is not the casual attention that most people offer, partial, divided, always ready to flee toward the next stimulus. This is presence as an act of sacred rebellion against the tyranny of the fragmented mind. You have discovered what the mystics and depth psychologists have always known, that attention, when concentrated and intentionally directed, becomes a force of almost alchemical power. It transforms not only your own experience, but the very fabric of the space you inhabit. When you enter a room, you do not simply occupy it, you inhabit it fully, bringing to bear the entire weight of your conscious awareness upon the present moment, like sunlight focused through a magnifying glass. This intensity of presence creates what Jung might have called a constellation in the collective field of consciousness. Just as celestial bodies exert gravitational influence upon one another across vast distances, your concentrated awareness exerts a psychological pull that others feel but cannot easily name. They sense that you are fully here, fully present, fully committed to the reality of this moment, in ways that make their own habitual half-presence feel suddenly inadequate, suddenly exposed. The majority of human interactions occur in what we might call the twilight realm of partial attention. People meet, exchange words, share space, but they remain fundamentally absent, their minds scattered across past regrets and future anxieties, their awareness fragmented by the constant pull of devices and distractions. They have learned to function in this state of chronic psychological absence, conducting their lives from behind a veil of inattention that protects them from the full impact of being alive. But when they encounter your intentional presence, this comfortable numbness becomes impossible to maintain. Your way of being in the world acts as a mirror that reflects back to them their own absence, their own flight from the intensity of fully experienced existence. You become a living reminder of what it means to be completely here, completely awake, completely engaged with the raw material of reality as it unfolds, moment by moment. This creates a particular kind of discomfort that runs deeper than social awkwardness or interpersonal friction. It is the discomfort of being called back from exile, summoned from the safer shores of distraction into the more dangerous waters of full consciousness. Your presence becomes an invitation they are not sure they want to accept, a door they are not certain they are ready to walk through. The concentrated nature of your awareness creates what ancient traditions called presence as power. This is not the power of domination or control, but the power that emerges when consciousness becomes coherent, unified, focused like light passing through crystal. You have learned to gather the dispersed energies of your psyche, the fragments of attention that usually scatter in a dozen directions, and direct them into the singular beam of Intentional awareness. This focusing of consciousness has an almost physical quality that others can sense, even when they cannot articulate it. They feel the weight of your attention when it falls upon them, the intensity of a mind that is not elsewhere but completely present to whatever is arising in this moment. It is like the difference between standing in diffuse daylight and standing in direct sunlight, the same source, but concentrated into something that can warm or burn depending upon the duration of exposure. For those accustomed to the shadows of inattention, this intensity can feel overwhelming. They've grown comfortable in the penumbra of partial engagement, where they can interact without fully committing, connect without fully revealing themselves, exist without fully being. Your presence challenges this comfortable half-life, demanding a level of authenticity and awareness that they may not be prepared to offer. Yet there is also something magnetic about this quality of presence, something that draws others even as it disturbs them at some unconscious level. They recognize what they are encountering, the possibility of full engagement with life, the potential for complete immersion in the present moment, rather than perpetual flight from it. They sense in your way of being a path back to themselves, a return from the exile of distraction to the homeland of core names. Awareness, your intentional presence, becomes both beacon and mirror, because it illuminates not only the moment at hand, but also the degree to which others have abandoned that moment in favor of somewhere or someone else. It reveals the extent to which they have learned to live at a remove from their own experience, always slightly detached, always partially elsewhere, always ready to escape into the familiar refuges of distraction when reality becomes too intense to bear. This is why your presence can feel like a challenge or even a judgment, though no judgment is intended. You simply exist fully where you are, bringing your complete awareness to bear upon whatever situation you find yourself in. This completeness of engagement creates a standard against which others unconsciously measure their own level of presence, often finding themselves wanting. The energy of intentional presence that you embody is neither aggressive nor passive. It is simply complete. You have learned to show up fully for your own life, and this fullness of being creates ripples in the consciousness of those around you. Like a stone dropped into still water, your presence sends concentric circles of awakening through the field of awareness, calling others back from their various forms of absence into the eternal now, where all real life unfolds. In choosing presence over absence, awareness over distraction, you have stepped out of the collective trance of half-living and into something more complete, more real, more fundamentally alive. This choice reverberates through your being and into the world around you, creating the very disturbance that signals the possibility of awakening. There is a grace that comes only through the complete exploration of darkness, the uncomfortable grace of having seen your own shadow so thoroughly that judgment becomes impossible. You have walked through the valley of your own contradictions, have met the aspects of yourself that you once believed were unforgivable. And in that meeting, something fundamental shifted. The internal critic that once ruled your inner landscape, with an iron fist, began to soften, to dissolve, to transform into something altogether different. A witness that sees without condemning, that observes without the need to fix or change or improve. This transformation is one of the most profound gifts of the individuation process, yet it is also one of the most disturbing to those who encounter it. For you have learned what Jung knew, that every human being contains the full spectrum of possibility, from saint to sinner, from angel to demon, and that these opposites are not enemies to be conquered, but aspects of the self to be integrated. Your journey through the shadow has taught you the futility of moral superiority, the exhausting impossibility of maintaining the illusion of purity, the profound relief that comes from accepting the totality of what it means to be human, where others expect the familiar dance of criticism or approval. You offer something far more radical, witnessing. This is not the passive observation of one who doesn't care, but the active presence of one who has learned to see without the distorting lens of personal agenda. Your gaze carries no weight of expectation, no burden of should or shouldn't, no hidden requirement that others perform or conform to earn your acceptance. You simply see what is, as it is, with you. The need to transform it into what you think it ought to be. This clear, unclouded seeing creates a profound discomfort in those around you. The human psyche has become so accustomed to the constant evaluation, the endless internal and external commentary that judges every thought, every feeling, every action as either good or bad, right or wrong, acceptable or shameful. We live in a world of perpetual court sessions, where everyone is simultaneously judge, jury, and defendant, where the gavel never stops falling, where the verdict is always guilty until proven otherwise. But your presence disrupts this familiar courtroom drama. You offer neither prosecution nor defense, neither conviction nor acquittal. You simply witness. And in that witnessing, you create a space where the legal system of judgment cannot function. This creates a strange vacuum, a disorienting silence where others expected the familiar noise of evaluation and critique. In this silence, they begin to hear something they may have never heard before. Their own voice, speaking without the need for justification or defense. Your non-judgmental presence becomes a mirror that reflects back to others, not what they should be, but what they actually are. This is terrifying for those who have spent lifetimes constructing elaborate facades, who have become so skilled at presenting acceptable versions of themselves that they have forgotten what lies beneath the performance. In the clear light of your witnessing, their projections cannot find purchase. The familiar strategies of deflection and blame, of making others responsible for their internal experience, become impossible in the face of your neutrality. They come to you unconsciously seeking the familiar patterns of judgment, either the harsh criticism that would confirm their deepest fears about themselves, or the false approval that would temporarily soothe their need for external validation. But you offer neither. Instead, you offer something far more challenging, the space to be authentically themselves, to exist without mask or pretense, to experience the radical possibility of being accepted exactly as they are. This acceptance is more challenging than any rejection they have ever faced. Rejection, at least, provides the familiar comfort of external blame, the well-worn path of victimhood, the escape hatch of righteous indignation. But acceptance removes these escape routes, forces them to confront the reality that if they are not happy with themselves, if they are not at peace with who they are, the responsibility for that unhappiness lies not with a judging world, but with their own internal relationship to their experience. Your compassionate neutrality becomes a kind of spiritual aikido, redirecting the force of their projections back to themselves, not as an attack, but as an invitation to self-ownership. When they rage, you do not rage back. When they criticize, you do not defend. When they perform, you do not applaud. You simply remain present, holding space for whatever arises, without the need to change it, fix it, or escape from it. This creates an almost unbearable intimacy, the intimacy of being truly seen without judgment. For most people, the experience of unconditional acceptance is so foreign, so contrary to their internal experience, that it registers initially as a threat. They have become so identified with their internal critic, so dependent on the familiar patterns of self-attack and self-defense, that your offer of peaceful neutrality feels like a dissolution of identity itself. Yet beneath the discomfort, something deeper recognizes the gift you offer. The soul knows the difference between the pseudo-acceptance that comes with conditions and the genuine acceptance that sees clearly and loves anyway. Your presence reminds them of a possibility they had forgotten. That it might be possible to exist without the exhausting burden of constantly proving their worthiness, without the desperate need to earn love through performance, without the crushing weight of trying to be someone other than who they actually are. The uncomfortable grace of non-judgment is perhaps the most radical form of love available to human beings, not the sentimental love that sees only the good, not the enabling love that refuses to see clearly, but the fierce, clear love that sees everything and accepts it all as part of the mysterious wholeness of being human. In offering this grace, you become a living reminder of the possibility that exists beyond the prison of perpetual self-evaluation, beyond the courtroom of the mind where the trial never ends. There is a particular alchemy that occurs when you cease to flee from the darker territories of your own psyche and instead turn to face what Jung called your shadow with the curiosity of a scientist and the compassion of a lover. This integration, this conscious befriending of what you once considered your enemy creates a transformation so profound that it radiates from you like heat from a forge where base metals are transmuted into gold. You have accomplished what most feared to attempt. You have made peace with your demons, and in doing so, you have become magnetically, dangerously whole. Feel how this integration has changed the very texture of your presence. Where once you carried the brittle tension of someone perpetually at war with themselves, you now embody the relaxed power of one who has negotiated a treaty with all aspects of their being. Your anger, once a force you pushed down or acted out unconsciously, has become a conscious ally in service of your boundaries and values. Your jealousy, once a source of shame, has transformed into a compass pointing toward what you truly desire. Your capacity for manipulation, once denied and therefore wielded unconsciously, has become a conscious skill in service of love and protection. This is the paradox that others sense, but cannot comprehend. Your integration of darkness has made you more genuinely loving, not less. By acknowledging your capacity for selfishness, you have become more truly generous. By accepting your potential for cruelty, you have developed authentic kindness. By embracing your shadow's hunger for power, you have learned to wield influence with wisdom rather than unconscious compulsion. You have discovered what the alchemists knew, that lead must be acknowledged as lead before it can become gold. Watch how others respond to this integrated wholeness. They circle you like moths drawn to a flame. They cannot understand it, attracted by the aliveness, the authenticity, the undeniable magnetism of someone who has stopped apologizing for being human. Yet simultaneously, they recoil from what your integration represents. The possibility that they too might be required to face their own carefully hidden shadows, to acknowledge their own capacity for what they have spent their lives denying. Your comfortable relationship with your own darkness creates a psychic disturbance in those still committed to the exhausting project of being only good, only light, only acceptable. They sense in you a freedom they have never allowed themselves, the freedom to be whole rather than perfect, real rather than righteous, human rather than holy. This freedom threatens the very foundation of their self-concept, built as it is on the repression and projection of everything they cannot accept about themselves. Notice how your integration affects the energy in rooms you enter, where others carry the unconscious tension of internal warfare, shadow, battling persona, authentic self, wrestling with social compliance. You emanate the settled power of someone who has made peace with all their contradictions. This integration creates what Jung called a transcendent function, the ability to hold opposites in creative tension, rather than splitting them into good and bad, acceptable and unacceptable. This is why your presence can feel so unsettling to those still identified with their light side only. They have built their entire identity around being the opposite of what they fear they might be: the generous person who has never acknowledged their greed, the peaceful person who has never owned their rage, the humble person who has never faced their grandiosity. Your wholeness reveals the shadow of their goodness, the dark twin of their light that they have spent years trying to murder but can only ever exile. The magnetism you now carry is not the false charm of someone trying to be appealing, but the authentic attraction of someone who has become genuinely interesting through their willingness to be complex. You no longer radiate the one-dimensional energy of someone performing a role, but the multifaceted richness of someone who has gathered all their scattered pieces and integrated them into a living whole. This wholeness creates what depth psychologists call presence, the unmistakable energy of someone who is fully here, fully themselves, without apology or pretense. Yet this integration comes with its own burden. You discover that your shadow, once integrated, does not disappear but becomes a conscious partner in your psychological dance. You must remain vigilant, not against your darkness, but with it, using its energy consciously rather than being used by it unconsciously. Your anger becomes a sword you can draw when needed, rather than a wild animal that attacks without warning. Your sexuality becomes a conscious force you can channel rather than a desperate need that controls you from the unconscious. Others sense this conscious relationship with power, and it both attracts and intimidates them. They recognize that you have access to energies they have cut themselves off from: the fierce protective instinct, the healthy selfishness, the capacity for strategic thinking, the ability to say no without guilt. Your shadow integration has given you what they unconsciously hunger for: the right to take up space, to have needs, to be imperfect, to be fully human. This is the uncomfortable truth about shadow work. It does not make you more socially acceptable, but rather more genuinely magnetic. It transforms you from someone who is merely nice into someone who is powerful in service of love. Your integrated darkness becomes a source of strength rather than shame, depth rather than pathology, magnetism rather than manipulation. You have learned the secret that the mystics and depth psychologists have always known. Wholeness requires the conscious integration of everything you are, not the perfection of only your acceptable qualities. In embracing your shadow, you have become not a better person in the conventional sense, but a more complete human being. This completeness radiates an unmistakable power that draws others toward their own possibility of wholeness. In the secret chambers of the soul, where the eternal flame of self-worth burns independent of external winds, you have discovered the ancient art of drawing water from your own well. This is not the shallow pool of narcissistic self-regard, nor the brittle armor of defensive self-protection, but something far more profound: the deep aquifer of authentic self-validation that springs from the bedrock of your own being. Here, in this inner sanctuary, you have learned to be your own witness, your own judge, your own source of the recognition that others seek desperately in the fickle mirrors of social approval. This transformation represents one of the most radical shifts in human consciousness. The movement from external to internal authority, from seeking the self in others' eyes, to finding it in the quiet depths of your own knowing. Like a tree that has grown deep roots and no longer depends on the uncertain rains of others' approval. You have developed an energetic independence that creates ripples of both admiration and threat in the psychological field around you. Your self-sourced authority becomes a kind of psychological revolution, though you may never announce it with words. In a world where most souls wander like beggars with empty cups, seeking drops of validation from every passing stranger, you have become the one who carries your own well. This completeness, not the false completeness of the inflated ego, but the genuine wholeness of the individuated soul, creates a disturbance in the collective field of neediness that binds most human relationships together. Others, still caught in the ancient dance of seeking themselves in external reflections, encounter your self-validation like desert travelers encountering an oasis. The very existence of your internal authority challenges the fundamental assumption upon which their psychological economy is built, that worth must be earned through others' approval, that value must be confirmed by external sources, that the self is somehow incomplete without the constant reassurance of social validation in your presence. They are forced to confront the poverty of their own self-relationship, the ways in which they have outsourced their sense of worth to the uncertain marketplace of others' opinions. Your freedom from the need for external confirmation becomes a mirror that reflects back to them their own chains, the invisible bonds of validation-seeking that have kept them prisoners in a jail whose keys they carry but have forgotten how to use. This confrontation with their own dependency creates a complex emotional response. On one level, they are drawn to your self-contained completeness, like moths to flame, sensing in your presence the possibility of liberation from the exhausting the cycle of seeking approval and fearing rejection. Your internal authority whispers to their souls of a different way of being, a path toward freedom from the tyranny of others' judgments. Yet simultaneously, your self-validation threatens the very foundations upon which their identity has been built. If you can find worth within yourself, what does that say about their lifelong project of seeking it elsewhere? If you can be complete without their approval, what value does their opinion hold? Your independence challenges not only their dependency, but their sense of importance in the lives of others. Their belief that they are needed as validators and judges. In the depths of the collective unconscious, your self-sourced authority awakens ancient memories of what Jung called the original wholeness, that primordial state of being before the psyche split itself into seeker and sought, validator and validated. Your presence becomes a reminder of humanity's birthright, the capacity for internal authority that needs no external confirmation to know its own worth. This remembering is both gift and wound, like Adam and Eve tasting the fruit of knowledge. Those who encounter your self-validation are awakened to their own potential for internal authority, while simultaneously becoming aware of how far they have wandered from their own inner Eden. The possibility you embody of being whole without needing others to complete you illuminates both the path forward and the distance they have traveled from their authentic selves. Your self-contained completeness operates according to what the alchemists understood as the principle of the Ouroboros, the serpent that feeds upon itself, creating a perfect circle of self-sustaining energy. You have learned to generate your own validation, to recognize your own worth, to celebrate your own victories, and to comfort yourself in your defeats. This creates an energetic field of wholeness that others find both magnetic and intimidating. In relationships, your self-validation creates space for genuine connection rather than the desperate entanglement of mutual neediness. Because you do not require others to fill the void of your own self-worth, you can meet them as a complete being engaging with other complete beings, rather than as a half-soul seeking its missing piece. This authenticity of connection love, offered freely rather than extracted, desperately becomes another source of discomfort for those still caught in the web of validation-seeking. Your internal authority becomes a teaching without words, a demonstration of what becomes possible when the human soul learns to recognize its own inherent worth. In your self-validation, others glimpse their own potential for freedom from the endless hunger for approval that has driven so much of human behavior. You show them, simply by being, that the well of self-worth lies not in others' opinions, but in the deep springs of their own authentic being. In your completeness, they encounter their own possibility. In your independence, they meet their own potential liberation. In your self-sourced authority, they glimpse the eternal truth that the validation they seek has been within them all along, waiting patiently to be discovered in the quiet depths of their own soul's well. There is a fundamental difference between those who live and those who become. The majority of human beings reach a certain stage of psychological development, usually in early adulthood, then crystallize into that form, spending the remainder of their lives defending and maintaining the structure they have created. But you have chosen a different path, one that Jung recognized as the hallmark of the individuated soul, the path of conscious becoming, where growth never ceases and transformation becomes a way of life rather than a destination reached. This choice to remain in perpetual becoming creates around you an energy field that others can sense but rarely understand. It is the energy of the chrysalis, not the static cocoon that merely protects, but the dynamic vessel of metamorphosis, where dissolution and reconstitution occur simultaneously. You carry within your being the continuous process of psychological death and rebirth, the endless cycle of shedding old skins to reveal new possibilities of existence. To those who have settled into the comfortable illusion of psychological completion, your commitment to ongoing transformation appears both fascinating and threatening. They observe your willingness to question yourself, to challenge your own assumptions, to dismantle beliefs that no longer serve your growth, and they experience a mixture of admiration and alarm. Your very existence challenges their fundamental assumption that growth should end, that one should eventually arrive at a final, stable version of oneself, and then defend that territory for the remainder of life. But you have discovered what the alchemists knew, that the opus contra naturam work against nature requires constant attention to the fires of transformation. You understand that consciousness, like all living things, either grows or dies, either evolves or stagnates. There is no neutral ground, no permanent plateau where one can rest indefinitely without beginning the slow descent into psychological entropy. Your willingness to embrace the unknown territories of your own becoming creates a particular kind of discomfort in those who have made peace with their limitations. They watch as you venture into new aspects of yourself, explore unexplored potentials, question beliefs you once held sacred, and they feel the stirring of their own unlived possibilities. Possibilities they have carefully buried beneath layers of resignation and rationalization. This stirring is deeply unsettling because it reminds them of dreams deferred, of paths not taken, of aspects of themselves they abandoned in favor of safety and predictability. Your presence becomes a mirror reflecting not who they are, but who they might have become if they had possessed the courage to continue, growing beyond the point where society suggested they should stop. The psychological stasis that characterizes most adult life is not natural, but learned. Children are natural becomers, constantly changing, adapting, growing, exploring new facets of their identity and capability. But somewhere in the process of socialization, most people learn to fear change, to equate stability with success, to view psychological transformation as evidence of instability rather than health. You have refused this equation. You have chosen to remain loyal to the principle of growth that governs all living systems, understanding that in the realm of consciousness, as in the natural world, that which ceases to grow begins to die. This choice keeps you perpetually in the liminal space between who you have been and who you are becoming, a space that others find uncomfortable even to witness. Like the butterfly emerging from its cocoon, you embody the possibility of radical transformation. But unlike the butterfly, whose metamorphosis occurs once in a hidden chrysalis, your transformation is ongoing and visible. Others watch as you shed old patterns of thinking, feeling, and being with the same naturalness that a snake sheds its skin. They observe your willingness to let parts of yourself die so that new aspects can be born. And they are confronted with their own attachment to the psychological forms they have mistaken for their true identity. Your commitment to conscious becoming creates what Jung called enantiodromia, the tendency of psychological opposites to transform into one another. In your willingness to dissolve, you become more solid. In your acceptance of uncertainty, you find a deeper security. In your embrace of change, you discover what is truly permanent within you. These paradoxes are visible in your presence, creating a complexity that others find difficult to categorize or understand. The energy of transformation that surrounds you acts as both invitation and indictment to those ready for their own metamorphosis. You represent hope, living proof that growth need not end, that one can continue becoming throughout an entire lifetime. But to those who have invested their identity in being fixed, finished, complete, your example challenges the very foundation of their self-concept. You have learned to inhabit the chrysalis as a permanent dwelling rather than a temporary shelter. You understand that the process of becoming is not a phase to be outgrown, but a way of being to be embraced. This makes you both inspiration and irritation to those around you, inspiration to the secret part of them that longs to grow, irritation to the defended parts that fears the dissolution such growth requires. In choosing conscious, becoming over unconscious, stagnation, you have allied yourself with the fundamental creative principle of the universe, the force that drives all evolution, all growth, all movement, toward greater complexity and consciousness. This alliance shows in everything about you: your willingness to question, your openness to change, your comfort with uncertainty, your embrace of the unknown. Others sense this alliance and recognize, perhaps unconsciously, that they are in the presence of someone who has chosen life over death, growth over stagnation, becoming over being. This recognition stirs something deep within them, remembrance of their own potential for transformation, their own capacity for ongoing growth, their own possibility of emerging from whatever chrysalis they have built around themselves. Your presence becomes a gentle but persistent reminder that the chrysalis was never meant to be a permanent home, but a temporary vessel for the miracle of becoming something entirely new.